everybody. Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. And we are a family paranormal investigative team and found ourselves during the pandemic a little going stir crazy. So we decided to do this podcast so we can at least talk about all things paranormal that we love. And we actually have 19 episodes in audio form that we've done over the past couple years. And we will put links down there so that if you want to listen to what we've done in the past, you're more than welcome, including a recent interview with TV's Dalen Spratt from the Ghost Brothers, which was, really fun and interesting. So we'll put that link there. But now we're happy to be part of the Morissette Media family and doing our video version of this podcast. So we're super stoked and hope everyone is too. So today, I'm going to introduce everyone here in the crew, so get to know us a little bit, and then we'll tell you what we're talking about. My name is Christina, and I'm the lead investigator for the team.
I'm Allie, and I'm a bit of an empath, but I also am an investigator on the team and do a little behind-the-scenes work.
Hey guys, I'm Anthony. I'm the lead researcher, an investigator, and tech expert.
All right, so that's all of us. And today we're going to be talking about something that I think everyone can relate to in one way, shape, or form, and that is urban legends. So, when we think about urban legends, what's one that pops into your mind, Allie?
For me, Slender Man, which is interesting because it started as like a creepypasta.
Right.
But then developed into this huge thing. It even led to a crime, right?
Yes, it did. A pretty brutal one. Now, if anyone doesn't know what a creepypasta is, there's a site called Creepypasta, and people would go on there and share their creepy stories, right? And these were made-up stories. Yeah, all fictional stories. Yeah. But sometimes people can start to believe them to be factual.
Right.
So Slender Man started out that way. And, we're not going to get into all the Slender Man lore here because it would take up like 3 episodes, I think.
Yeah.
But it did lead to a pretty brutal crime of 2 young girls who were, I think, in middle school who tried to kill their third friend at the behest of Slender Man, that they were going to commit this crime so they could go live with him in the woods.
Yeah, almost like a sacrifice.
Exactly. Yeah. And thankfully the girl survived.
Yeah.
But it's just one of a handful of crimes that happened because of that creepypasta. What about you, Anthony?
I like classics. So one of the ones that I always go to is the Crybaby Bridge. Which, those of you who don't know, almost every state, every town has their own form of Crybaby Bridge, where the story goes a mother threw her child over the bridge into the water and now is destined to roam the waters looking for her child, and all you hear is the baby crying and the mother weeping.
Right.
That's always one that you can find in almost every state, and I think it's one of those things that endures no matter where you go.
Oh, yeah, and it's made for a lot of fun YouTube and TikTok investigation where they go and capture the crying in the background.
Right,
and so these are all fun. Mine is, I think, La Llorona. If you're not familiar with that, but I mean, my grandmother told me that story as a kid. It was always used to scare little kids, in Hispanic families like mine, and so. But that one is, of course, the weeping woman who, had been spurned and then killed her kids, and then kept going looking for them. And if you hear the crying out there by a body of water, you better go the other way because she's going to try and take your kid or hurt you.
There's even a clip recently of a town in Mexico where the whole town came out at night because you could hear the screams of a woman. And it was very audibly found, and police actually went into a building and found a dress.
Yeah, like a nightgown or something.
And it's so believed in this town, in this country, that they burned the dress in the middle of the street to try and ward off the spirit because they were so afraid that La Llorona was
I remember
coming.
that clip. That was like bone-chilling screaming.
It was really creepy. Whether you believe it to be true or not, I mean, just the screams alone are chilling.
Absolutely.
So,
well, today we're going to actually try and focus a little bit on our local urban legends.
Yes.
Right.
And we're in the Richmond, Virginia area here. Tons of history in this. This is the birthplace of our country. We have a lot of wars and, battlefields still here. We have a lot of areas for a lot of wrong that was done.
Yes.
There's so many haunted locations here in this area. So it also brings with it some urban legends.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about 3 of them today.
Yeah.
Allie's going to start us off. So why don't you tell us the first one we're going to talk about?
So I actually want to start by referencing Hollywood Cemetery, which is the major cemetery out here in Richmond. There is supposedly resides the Richmond Vampire. Okay. So a little about him, there is a mausoleum there where it's marked W.W. Poole.
Okay.
And there are creepy things about the mausoleum itself. It's marked with just the date 1913, which is supposedly when W.W. Poole's wife died. So not him.
Okay.
Just the 1913.
So there's no birth and death date.
There's no birth or death date. So that leads some people to go, okay, is he immortal? And he would be a vampire, right?
Of course.
Even people take the WW on the outside and go, that looks like fangs. So that kind of like adds to the lore of it.
Does,
right.
But yeah.
And then there were like ancient Egyptian and Masonic designs on the tomb.
Okay.
And then of course people start going, that's a little creepy and immortal-y.
Anytime you involve the Masons in anything, it lends something to it.
No one trusts the Freemasons.
Exactly. And people
Watch out, Anthony.
I know, right?
W. Poole actually was ran out of England because he was a vampire.
Right.
So that is like the major like lore behind him, is that he was ran out of England, came here, and now he's a vampire that haunts us, I guess.
Okay. All right.
So a little about, I guess, the story of what, story of how he came to be.
Okay.
Okay, so it started because the Churchill Tunnel, which is near Hollywood Cemetery.
Right.
It was known for having almost like a curse on it, because there were tons of floodings, there were cave-ins.
Right.
It was kind of disastrous, but people, back in the day had to work there.
And this is like
This was in like the 1920s.
like a railroad type tunnel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like where locomotives would be working and stuff like that.
Okay.
So basically, they felt that the Richmond Vampire was haunting the Churchill Tunnel and causing the floodings and causing the cave-ins.
Right.
So it kind of escalated from there because there was a particularly disastrous cave-in that happened in 1925.
Yeah.
And during this, they saw at the end of the big cave-in a horrific creature exiting the tunnel. And they described him as having fang-like teeth. They said he was covered in blood, almost as if he had been like feeding on the people who had been trapped in the cave-in. And then he even had like rolls of decomposing flesh hanging from his body.
Yeah.
And people assumed, because back then, W.W. Poole was supposed to have died like 2 to 5 years before that. Okay. But there were still sightings, right? So they thought that because of the decomposing flesh rolls like that, that's how they treated the bodies back then after they died. So if he was immortal, he may still be decomposing.
But still walking around.
Still walking around.
So it's vampire.
Exactly. A vampire.
Zompire.
So,
I love it.
That's
Hashtag
kind of,
Zompire.
Yeah, right?
Exactly. So it's interesting because that's what people saw. And then there were even people who claimed men chased him to try and see what he was doing, like if he was feeding on these workers. And they went to the mausoleum because he ran to Hollywood Cemetery.
Right.
They said they saw him slip in before they could reach him. Others say they jimmied it open and saw him slip inside the coffin and saw the lid close. And then they like tried to open it and they didn't have enough strength. Like it was as if it was locked inside.
Okay.
That's what some of the reports were.
Or he was holding it from the inside.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's
and
creepy.
And the other thing that they said was that he was in the mausoleum screaming curses. So that like freaked them out.
Scare them away, pretty much.
So they didn't want to go near him, of course. So these are all the reports of that day.
Okay.
But there's probably a more, I guess, truthful scenario.
Logical explanation.
Exactly, that turned into this urban legend.
Okay.
So we can talk a little bit about the history, I guess, now.
Okay.
So on that day, there was someone named Benjamin Mosby.
Yes.
He was a fireman, and he worked there shoveling coal and different things underneath. When the bricks started to fall down, he was like yelling at people like, oh, it's coming,
Yeah.
And when the explosion happened, he likely, because they worked without their shirts, it was hot down there, hard labor. So he likely was scalded by steam and hot water on his body, which then would probably cause blisters and flaps of skin and things on his body.
Yeah.
It's awful.
So he actually did escape. He escaped by going under the train.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he crawled underneath, which caused more injuries, which is likely why he was covered in blood.
Mm-hmm.
Even the explosion itself likely threw him back and caused the broken teeth. So when he emerged, it was probably him.
Yeah.
From what the story says. And he emerged and was, in severe shock.
Yeah.
So when he approached people, he was very calmly just saying, "Can you please let my wife know I'm okay, not to worry, I made it out," type thing. But what happened is he collapsed and he was just completely...
God, that's sad.
Yeah. It's really sad. And people just tried to help him, of course, but there wasn't too much they could do except for send him to the hospital where he later died.
Yeah.
But some of the story goes back to the vampire because of how he looked. They even saw him try and run towards the James River. So that was where the whole kind of garbled retelling came in of him running towards the cemetery. It was actually him running towards James River,
Right.
So things like that.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a theme for each of the stories that we're going to tell today.
Yeah.
But, urban legends are very much like a game of telephone.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, so everyone's played that as a kid, right? And the circle on the story is totally different.
Yeah.
So you get one piece of fact that you start out with, like a factual, event or what have you, and it can get turned over so many times that by the end of it, you don't recognize what happened.
Right.
So urban legends can be fun when you're a kid, but then as you get older, you hear this story of this fireman, you're like, man, that's horrible. It's sad,
Yeah.
But this gets even more involved, though, now after the fact, because then we go into missing body parts and so forth.
Right. So with W.W. Poole, he was actually just a man in Richmond. He was born in Mississippi in 1847.
Right.
Came to Richmond in the late 1860s.
So he wasn't from England.
He wasn't from England. He was definitely not. And when he came here, he actually became a successful accountant.
Okay.
So he was a successful member of the community. In other words, he was a Freemason,
Still
ironically.
a Freemason.
Who wasn't back in the day?
Exactly. Which could explain the Masonic design, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so basically, he was normal. He died when he was 75 from pneumonia, which was around 1922, actually.
Right.
And his wife had died in 1913. They had 4 kids. He was very just an average guy.
Yeah.
But because of this vampire lore, it turned into the urban legend. And even by the 60s, 70s, college kids local were, telling this story of W.W. Poole, the vampire. And they were going to, his mausoleum and trying to either prove something to their friends because they are approaching it, or some actually broke in were medical students and took parts of his body. So the ironic,
there's a souvenir for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the ironic thing is, even though now people still claim to have sightings of him and go to the tomb because it's W.W. Poole the vampire, he's not even in the tomb anymore. They moved him and his wife
to a
different section of the cemetery.
We can't blame them.
Because, people were desecrating basically where he was,
Wow.
So he's not even there at all.
He's not there. So
I'm sure
he's definitely not a vampire.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the sightings is, does that mean it's thought form?
Yeah.
Like we've talked about before.
We're going to have Anthony get into the thought form thing after he tells his story.
Yeah.
But that's also going to run true in all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just the game of telephone, but the after effects of the fear of these urban legends and what it can maybe do.
Yeah.
I think it's like a perfect storm in a way, because you got the fear aspect, you got the thought form that it comes from that, and we'll get into what those are in a minute. But we also have the paranormal activity itself, the energy that's built up as a result.
Right. And the tunnel explosion.
Think about, you got these 2 men who lived completely normal lives.
Right.
One who died trying heroically to save other people by warning them that this class was happening. And then years later, you have all these people telling the story of, a vampire. Whether you're the man who actually died in that tunnel from those injuries, and you're hearing this story that you're pretty much a monster,
right,
killing people. That's being told now, or you're this innocent guy who's just a freaking accountant who's just trying to live his life.
Who everyone's now saying is a vampire.
And now think about if you are hearing these stories as these people, wouldn't you be roaming the cemetery too, like trying to say, "Hey, this isn't my story. Tell it right."
That's true. You know? And I mean, there have been accounts of stuff at the tunnel, right?
Yeah.
More so than at the cemetery.
Exactly, because people have walked by the tunnel and heard screams of, like, get me out of here. Or locomotive wheels screeching down there. And different things like that, you know, very loud, as if it's like a super haunted zone because of what happened.
I mean, when you have a tragedy like that, something really like...
it leaves an imprint.
It does, yeah.
Especially because, after he warned them, everyone trying to get out of that tunnel, it was pure chaos,
Yeah. Oh, that's
because
right.
they were, when they're trying to get out, everyone's so desperate to be the one that escapes before the tunnel collapses. The stories were that they were pulling knives that they had on the job and slashing each other so that they would trip the other person and they would get ahead.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly.
I mean,
it was pure desperation and chaos.
It was that fight or flight instinct kicking in. And that much energy build up over time from that kind of
for sure.
Oh yeah, it's like an imprint on the environment, So
wow. That's one of those stories that just like I've heard it already. Okay, I know all this stuff.
Yeah,
gives you the chills when you hear it again. Because I mean, I can't even imagine being in that position of just trying to fight for your life and having to fight other people that you're trying to help.
Yeah.
So, God, that's horrible.
And some people weren't even recovered because they had to, like, abandon the rescue mission because at the time it cost too much money.
Oh, wow.
And, they didn't feel like it was worth it. In other words, the people who were in charge, which is really sad because there's probably still, to this day, bodies down there that were never recovered.
Wow.
I mean, that much unrest, that they never were found.
Yeah.
That's another imprint that, can drive that energy to act up. So people hear those screams or the vampire is seen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of energy buildup, man.
Oh. Yeah, that's something I think that always sticks with me every time I hear it, Before we move to Anthony's story, because, I mean, I don't know what else to say about this one. It gets to me.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I meant to introduce our producer over here at the beginning. This is Ray.
Hello.
Hey, Ray. Thanks for joining us in this podcast. I wanted to ask you if you had heard any urban legends through your life, one that maybe stood out to you.
Well, I know there's the Mothman of Virginia, but in Maryland, where I'm from, we have the Goat Man.
I've heard of the Goat Man.
Right. Yeah. He scared the bejesus out of me.
Really?
As a kid, yeah. I was scared he would go and drown my dog.
Oh, wow.
Oh, how awful.
He doesn't go after humans, apparently. The dogs.
Oh, my gosh.
I didn't know that part of it.
I didn't either. We're dog lovers here.
Yeah, it might be a telephone thing, but
Sure, of course.
that's what I remember scaring me.
What's funny about that too is, the idea that alien interactions, they often go after dogs first before they take humans.
Yeah.
That's the lore because dogs are seen as protectors.
Right.
And so that's interesting that urban legend is born in the same time frame.
Well, we always go off on tangents when we start talking about stuff, but, we always have the tie with paranormal activity in a location that a lot of times you'll have more UFO sightings, all of a sudden more Bigfoot sightings, and all of a sudden more ghost activity. It all seems to be tied together. And, so I always find it interesting when I hear stuff like that with the animals concerned.
Yeah.
Because then right away we're like, okay, those aliens,
they're going down.
I said, don't even come for my animals. Cause
pretty much Goat Man's an alien.
Yeah, basically. And that's what they say about Mothman, too.
Exactly.
So there you go. Okay, so now I'm going to throw it to Anthony because he's got his own urban legend to talk about from here.
Well, as much as the vampire is scary, there's nothing more animalistic or bestial than a werewolf. Okay. And Henrico actually has his own werewolf, the Henrico Werewolf.
Yep.
What's interesting about this is through all my research, there is no exact date for the first sighting. It's believed it was like the mid to late 2000s that the first stories came out, but the legend has it going all the way back to the Civil War. There's a story in the legend that a Civil War soldier was desperate to fight off the invading soldiers coming after him and turned into a werewolf to fight off these soldiers and died of his injuries as a result, and that it's his ghost that people are seeing.
Good story.
But that's just the lore.
Right.
The first sightings, actually in the 2000s, the first 2 were proven to be misleading, false.
Like a hoax.
Hoax. The police actually found 2 people who were dressing up in costume, pretending to be werewolf.
Hey, you're bored on a Saturday night.
And you're in near colleges, kids are telling stories, it's natural. So you think, okay, case closed, right? Henrico Werewolf, not really true. Stories are still being told of sightings to this day, as recent as a couple years ago. This is an area in Henrico called The Springs. It's a recreation center. It was formerly Confederate Hills Recreation Center, but it's now The Springs. And the stories go that people who live in or around this area see a giant wolf, bipedal figure. It sometimes goes black fur, gray fur, always with a white or silver streak in its fur. Always approaches on 2 feet first, always standing upright.
It's a little intimidating, I'm not going to lie.
And again, this is kind of where the telephone thing comes in, because some people will say it gets scared as soon as you approach it and it takes off running into the woods. Other people say that it comes running at you, as if to attack.
From the woods, yeah.
From the woods.
Okay.
Other people will say that it kind of stares at you, waiting to see what you're going to do, and then takes off before it because of being afraid.
Right.
The most interesting one is some people say that it's playful. Some people think that it wants to come up and play with you and have fun.
Right.
But then eventually will kind of slink back into the shadows and disappear. But no one's ever gotten close enough to see its actual canine features, which was interesting. It always takes off on all 4s when it takes off. Okay. And so this is why, the stories of what it actually is, we'll get into later, but it ranges. But that's the Henrico Werewolf.
So there was never like an attack or anything like that?
No, it's never been proven to actually have a physical interaction with someone, which is interesting.
Right.
However, there have been daytime and nighttime sightings of actual packs of white dogs roaming the area, which is interesting. And we'll include notes in our links down below of our sources.
Okay.
But there was a story from a woman who, used to go to her husband's house when he was a teenager and they were living at his parents' house. And they would be in the backyard, just smoking and hanging out. And all of a sudden, this pack of wolf-like creatures would approach, all white and silver. But they would ignore the people. They weren't looking at the people when they walked by. They were walking past them. And what they said was it was eerie because they were in a trance-like state. They were kind of like mesmerized by something, almost as if something was leading them or calling them to a different location.
Okay.
And it was to the point where the people just didn't exist to these creatures, which was
that's
weird.
Kind of an eerie vibe, I guess.
Very, very eerie. So that was the biggest sighting that I could find.
Okay.
In my research.
Modern day.
But it's interesting because the area itself has a lot of history too. One of the people who came there actually built the springs because the area is known for its natural springs.
Right.
Yeah.
And he brought his wife there to heal her because she was sick. The illness is not known. He actually helped build the electric railway from Richmond to a local cemetery during the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
They actually had so many, dead among the Civil War during the battles that they had to build this railway to transport them to the cemetery directly. So there's a lot of history to the Henrico area.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And
there's a lot of buildings in and around Richmond that were actually used as makeshift hospitals.
Yeah.
And that are still standing. So that's where a lot of the paranormal activity that is reported tends to come from.
Right.
Or areas like this and areas where there were battles and transporting the dead,
Yeah.
Well, that's where kind of the energy buildup comes in because of all that death and all that, history that's involved.
Right.
And that energy can also lend itself to helping, the thought form.
Right.
Things.
Yeah.
Now, thought forms. We mentioned this a couple times already in the podcast, but there's a couple of different thought forms that we can get to. There's a Tibetan thought form that is called a tulpa. A tulpa is something that a singular person creates and it kind of forms its own identity, its own personality. It kind of has like a free will. It's kind of like if your imaginary friend became free thinking.
Right.
You know? And then there's an egregore.
Right.
An egregore, I think that's what we're dealing with in these cases here.
Right.
An egregore is a collective group of people will put their energy into believing this story, and actual entity will form to make it so that these things actually do exist. So, for instance, the vampire.
Right.
The story is told so many times from so many people, whether it's college kids or locals coming through, that all that energy collectively brings this vampire to life, not in flesh and blood, but in energy form.
Right.
And so when you see sightings in the distance of a vampire dashing through the cemetery, or you hear the sounds of the werewolf at night, that's the energy buildup. That's a thought form haunting.
Okay.
Right.
It doesn't make it any less real.
Yeah.
It just means that it didn't exist. Yeah.
Well, a good example of this, and we've talked about this, and you can explain it more, is the Dybbuk box.
Oh my gosh.
Which we've talked about before, but I'm going to let you explain that theory.
Yeah, we'll probably have to do. We have an episode where we talked about all the details previously, but we'll have to get into all the details more in a future episode because it's such a loaded thing.
Yeah.
Pretty much the Dybbuk box was a story about this person was selling a box that supposedly was Jewish connected. And the mythology was that the Jewish community had sealed a demon inside of this box using wax and their
they had a whole ritual.
Yeah. And they sealed the demon in the box, and then the box somehow got sold out of the family. And a person bought it
at an estate sale.
Right. And opened the box, and the demon came out and started attacking this guy and his family. Well, it turns out years later,
he does what you naturally do, right? You put it on eBay.
He put it on eBay. He sold it. Years later, it's now owned and featured as one of the centerpieces of Zach Bagans' museum in Las Vegas.
Right.
For those of you who don't know, Zach Bagans, well-known paranormal investigator. Leave it at that. And so the Dybbuk box has now been proven from the original poster on eBay to be a made-up story. There is a Dybbuk in Jewish folklore, but it's not a demon. It's a ghost. It's a person. It's the spirit of a person who kind of is just wandering.
Yeah.
Right.
So this guy made up a story because he wanted to sell this box, and he was trying to create the lore. But he saw how out of control it got, because now there are thousands of people selling different Dybbuk boxes, claiming that they have demons inside of them.
Yep.
And it's also kind of appropriated Jewish folklore and Jewish culture. And so he came out to say, hey, I made this up. This was a false story.
But you can't dissuade people who already have this in their minds, much like the urban legends. They fully believe every Dybbuk box has a demon in it. They just do.
It's so out there in the culture now, in the world, that it's ingrained into the fabric of our society now.
Right.
As one of the urban legends. And because of how widespread it is, that culture, that energy buildup has formed thought form hauntings.
Yeah.
There's, a case that we know of because we followed another group of paranormal investigators, and we've covered this before in another episode, so you can go watch and listen to that. But pretty much this group was called in because this guy claimed to have a Dybbuk box with a demon haunting it, and he was very convinced he knew the exact name of the demon. He knew what was inside of it. So these investigators took the box, and they managed to get an MRI scan of the box that was inside of the box, and it was all modern day stuff.
Yeah.
All stuff that was bought modern day.
Yeah.
And yet they were still getting interactions with some sort of energy entity.
Yeah.
So what they came to find out was that it was a thought form entity. It was created. So many people had been told the story over the last few years that it really came to life, and it thought it was a demon. But the second they started treating it as a regular person, as not a demon, the negative interactions started dying down.
Fear was driving it.
Fear was its driving force. And once you took the fear away, it became a normal box with a little energy still attached to it, but it wasn't harmful. It wasn't scary.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is taking place here. The same kind of thing that was happening with these Dybbuk boxes.
Right.
Areas can have the same effect. Just because there isn't a flesh and blood werewolf or vampire roaming these areas doesn't mean that these werewolves or vampires don't exist.
Right.
They just exist in a different form.
Almost like in an apparition
Yes.
type way.
Right.
Kind of like a ghost of a werewolf or vampire, but one that people created, one that
Right.
didn't exist before. It was never living in our world.
Yeah.
Well, in another episode, we're going to get into a case that we actually investigated where this really rings true. So, we'll be able to dive into it more. But fear can drive a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be a fun one. We'll
Yeah.
dive in. Before I tell my urban legend story, I want to remind everybody to make sure you comment, like, subscribe, because we're going to have some really interesting episodes for everyone. You're not going to want to miss it. Please share as well. And there's going to be opportunities for you guys to see a lot more, too, down the road of investigative stuff that we're going to do. So we'll talk more about that, but I wanted to throw that in there before we move any further. So this one that I'm going to tell, a lot of people may have heard about this legend that aren't local, and there are reasons for that. But it's one of my favorites. So this one is less than 3 hours from here in Richmond, but it's still in Virginia. And it's the legend of the Bunnyman and Bunnyman Bridge. Have you heard of that one, Ray?
I don't believe I have, no.
Okay. All right. Well, this one, actually, if you were to search for Bunnyman or Bunnyman Bridge on TikTok, you'd see a bunch of stuff come up right away. The legend of the Bunnyman, God, it takes on so many forms. This can go way back to, like, I think it was 1904. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I want to read to you what the current urban legend is about the Bunnyman, and then we're going to go back in time.
Because the story is just as important as the actual
Absolutely.
facts.
It's like, it's kind of like Bloody Mary, and you'll see why I say that. Okay. At the stroke of midnight on Halloween, a killer in a white rabbit suit awaits. Lore has it, if you speak his name 3 times, he'll appear. Bunnyman, Bunnyman, Bunnyman. But don't expect to survive. He'll slash your throat and leave your body dangling from Bunnyman Bridge. That is the current urban legend.
A little disconcerting.
It is a little disconcerting.
All the best urban legends always have that, though.
Of course.
Yeah.
Even made up ones that we know, like Candyman. You know?
Yeah, of course.
I think
Got it.
it drives that fear up because
Right.
it challenges the person to go,
Oh, how
okay,
many-
I'm the bravest one. I'm going to be the one who does it.
I, as a child, had sleepovers where, we're going to go play Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
And I had the perfect setup in my house, let me tell you. I had this little, it was one of those, living areas here, and then you have this side of the house with 2 bedrooms and this side, right? So we had a door that you shut once you left the living room. And you had this little square that was like, boom, boom, where if you shut both bedroom doors, bathroom door, this door that led you in there, pitch black.
Oh, God.
And you're in a little square space.
Yeah.
So, sleepovers at my house,
That's where you did Bloody Mary.
absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
Anything scary that you got in that little box and you were like, okay, we're going to go for it.
Sounds like a good idea.
So fun times. But anyway, so here's the thing. Okay, Bunnyman Bridge and the Bunnyman himself has a few different iterations. So way back in like 1904, supposedly the story goes that there was a mental institution not far from where this all takes place, and they were transporting prisoners on a bus, and there was an accident. The bus overturns. This is like any movie you've ever seen about transporting a bus full of mental patients, right?
I mean, it's
And
Halloween all over again.
The beginning of Halloween,
Yeah.
perfect example. And so, some perish, some escape. They round up everyone except for 2 of them. Okay, so there's one that they say was, obsessed with rabbits for whatever reason. He was
Yeah.
obsessed with rabbits, and he was out in the woods killing rabbits, wearing their skins, hanging them from the trees, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And apparently he was like trying to avenge the death of his wife and child. Where that came in, we'll find out later.
Okay.
But then, there were kids making fun of him. So he decided, well, I'm going to, take my hatchet get rid of these kids and kill them, hang them from this bridge that
Yeah.
is now known as Bunnyman Bridge.
As one naturally does.
Yeah, of course. Of course they do.
Yeah.
You kind of have to.
Yeah.
So then we can fast forward a little bit to 1949. And what actually happened in 1949 was there was a big murder case here. And this is in the small town of Clifton, Virginia, where this bridge is. Okay. So mother and daughter are found murdered. A couple weeks later, the husband is arrested. He, beat the wife to death, buried the daughter alive. Horrible, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely horrible. So I think what happens is they take this story, and he actually was committed to a mental institution. Okay, for the criminally insane.
Right.
So now it becomes, he went back in time to 1904 and escaped.
Yeah.
Right,
course.
and then he's going to avenge the,
connected.
right.
Yeah.
So we take little bits of these events.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't even know if there really was ever a bus that overturned us
of
and
course.
escaped, but we're going to put that in the mix.
Yeah.
Okay, so then now we have another one, which is that this guy escaped currently in like modern times from an insane asylum.
Okay.
He throws axes or chainsaws at couples that park by the bridge.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like
Now,
the Lover's Lane.
the lover's lane type of
course.
scenario.
Yeah.
But now there is some truth to that one.
Right.
Okay, but not until 1970.
Okay.
Okay, so in October of 1970, there's an Air Force cadet that actually does go park by the bridge with a woman.
Okay.
And a man dressed in a white bunny suit comes out from the tunnel and has a hatchet, and he throws the hatchet through the windshield. Now, there's actual police reports on this. This actually did happen.
Wow.
They tear out of there. They're not waiting around to see how serious this guy is.
Well, no. Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, there's a new housing development, also like all on this road, which is Guinea Road.
Okay.
Okay. And there's a security card that keeps hearing a tap, like, can't figure out where this is coming from, right? So he finally sees someone who's very tall, dressed in a white bunny suit, taking a hatchet and just chopping away at one of the beams on the front porch that's being built on this unbuilt house.
Okay.
And the guy, they kind of make eye contact, but he can't identify the guy. He's got a bunny head on.
Right.
The bunny gets scared off and runs into the woods with his hatchet. In neither account was the suspect ever found. Okay.
That's a problem.
You know what it reminds me of is the clown sightings years ago.
Oh yes.
When people
absolutely.
just dressed up as clowns with their weapons and started, but they were never found.
No. They're just trying to scare.
Yeah,
the Jesus
that was
out of
terrifying,
everyone.
right?
Yeah.
So,
So go ahead. Were you going to say something, Ray?
I just remember that. That was terrible.
Yeah. Right. That was.
it was so widespread. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, some of the videos that came from those ordeals were terrifying.
Yeah.
Especially as someone who, growing up, always had a fear of clowns.
Yeah.
So, so they never caught the bunny man that did those two things
Right.
in October of 1970, but that kind of really adds to that mystery and that lore
Right.
of it. Was this a young guy? Is this man still around? Is he running around with his hatchet?
Yeah.
So what now was starting to happen, especially pre-pandemic, is this story is so built up now that there are people that go down there on Halloween to try and get a glimpse of the Bunnyman.
Right.
Of course.
And so the local police department would have to go stake out Bunnyman Bridge so that they could make sure, we don't want some copycat coming down here and terrorizing people who are coming to see the Bunnyman, or someone's going to get hurt, and they'd have to try and keep people away.
Yeah.
But even to this day, there are young people or young amateur paranormal investigators who want to prove that they could go down to Bunnyman Bridge
Yeah.
Of course.
and walk down that tunnel.
Yeah.
And say the Bunnyman's name 3 times. I saw one on TikTok that just, these 3 people start walking in and they hear a noise and, oh man, you never see 3 people run so fast out of this tunnel.
Right.
So, this has gotten to the point though where it's so widespread that it was featured on an episode of Scariest Places on Earth.
Classic.
Okay.
The classic show,
Yeah.
right? It also has had several movies based off of the Bunnyman legend.
Really?
Yeah, there's some right now on Tubi that are available. You can watch Bunnyman Massacre, and they all put their different spin on it. And a lot of young co-eds are murdered and all these different things. But the best one that I saw is much more recent. And someone actually had the sense to, because it added to some tourism for Clifton, Virginia.
Of course, kind of
right?
like Mothman did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They have a Mothman festival every year in Point Pleasant, right?
Yeah.
So it's very similar to what happens in Clifton. So this guy opened up a Bunnyman brew pub
Oh, of course.
right 3 miles down from Bunnyman Bridge, right on the same road. And he says
Wasn't he in the military as well?
Yeah, he was also an Air Force cadet.
Isn't that funny?
Right? So full circle.
Yeah.
But he says people actually come in there dressed as the Bunnyman.
Oh, wow.
So I
Taking
mean,
the love and obsession a little far, but
a little bit.
yeah.
But it works, right?
Yeah.
It's probably if tourists want to come and see Bunnyman Bridge, where are they going to go to get a bite to eat and get some beer?
Yeah.
I'd be
True.
interested to see if the energy buildup only extends to Halloween or if it could be like any time because of how many people go
I'm
there
sure
now.
it could be.
I kind of want to go investigate.
Better to go in the off season, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's going on Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on Easter.
Yeah.
Another bunny opportunity.
Hey.
So yeah, I mean, that one's always one that I really like and is kind of widespread, and a lot of people know about it all over the country.
Yeah.
So, so we were gonna talk a little bit about we talked about the egregore thing, but to me, this is one of those things that it's like with all of these stories,
Yeah.
you could take that and say, are people's fears driving these legends to just keep
Right.
going and going all these years later?
Yeah.
I mean, I got to think that it does because, we've been to a location that was a haunted location that once, that's where you're getting scared all the time, the time. And when the pandemic hit and there were no patrons going through, that fear factor all of a sudden kind of hit this weird
Yeah.
level and weird
built
vibe.
up.
Yeah. And they
Yeah.
were like, why aren't we able to scare people anymore? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
the real activity begins,
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a life of its own.
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, that's the thing about these thought forms. They're not, going on. They're not robots that are pre-programmed to
Right.
act a certain way. Once the energy is put out there, they believe themselves to be, sentient and alive in their own way.
Yeah.
They, maybe they don't understand that, they exist purely from our thoughts or whatever.
Right.
But they do think. And so when they don't have that expectation of what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to have as far as interactions go, and that stops,
Right.
Yeah.
what do they do?
Yeah.
Like,
Where does their energy go?
yeah.
Yeah.
Does it dissipate or does it go looking
Right.
for what it's missing? You know?
Well, I think, on our next episode, we're going to reflect a little bit about something we talked about on our very first podcast, which is the quantum consciousness theory.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get into it, but, in our opinion, that could be something that's driving hauntings, period, in various forms. So,
It challenges that idea that a ghost or a spirit has to have died on a property.
exactly.
Right.
Because that's always the thing. Everyone thinks that, someone died here. That means their spirit must be here. And
They're trapped here. They have unfinished
unfinished business. But
Don't get me started.
when we get into that episode next, the quantum consciousness kind of pushes that
Spells out,
Yeah.
limit,
Shatters that
Yeah, it
theory.
really
Yeah.
does.
So
Yeah.
Well, I was going to give everyone sort of like a glimpse real quick onto what they can maybe expect. We're going to be doing some investigative stuff here, like during certain episodes.
Right.
So certain techniques that we would maybe use if we were out in the field and do a little experiment here with Allie as sort of our conduit for that.
I'm a bit sensitive when it comes to
Just a little bit,
experiments, so-
yeah.
the things she gets are pretty amazing. So
Yeah, it's kind of a sight to watch. So we're going to do that in the next episode as part of what we're talking about here with this whole quantum consciousness thing. And we're going to have some good interviews coming up. We are going to talk about other topics like this that have to do with the paranormal. Obviously, there's been a lot in the news lately about UFOs.
Yeah.
UFOs are coming.
We'd be remiss if we didn't
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Definitely going to be talking about Bigfoot and the multiple versions of them around the world.
All the big
Yeah.
feet.
All the big feet.
All the big feet.
So many big feet. So we did want to throw it out to anyone watching that if you have urban legend stories of your own, if you have video clips of haunted occurrences or
Lights in the sky.
haunted locations, different things, or even a haunted location out here in the local, general vicinity of Richmond, Virginia, that you think we should go check out, please do send us an email. All that information is going to be here, either on the screen or in the info section, so that you can get in touch with us and say, hey, we think you should check this out. We want to be interactive with you guys. So
you can also direct message us on our socials,
right,
which are also listed down below.
We'll have them all for you.
And we'll be posting clips, of our investigations and evidence that we catch, because that's all part of it too.
Absolutely.
Want to be open, and we'll show you guys how we go about doing this, so that
right,
you know that it's not just a hobby for us. We actually truly believe in this stuff.
Absolutely. And hopefully by the end of it, you will too, if you're a skeptic. But we do invite that, Hey, if you have something to say, let us know.
There's room for everyone here.
Absolutely.
It's always great to challenge ourselves and to think about things in a different path. So
absolutely. So that's us for today. We do have something that we like to say when we wrap up. So Anthony?
Well, this is Phenomenon, Paranormal Podcast. Thank you for joining us. And remember, don't fear the unknown.